So,
Wait, you yelling at Arash?
Brian, I'm online. It's all right. I hope that didn't hurt anyone's ear. All right. Minimize. And let's go. All right, here we go. Welcome to episode 1 of the Turtledust tutorials. We are going to be talking about Adobe Fresco. I'm going to take you through an interface. The interface. Let me start over because a little bit of nerves. I'm the only one here. I'm all by myself. I've done these workshops before and just getting the jitters out. But here we go. I've planned it and I've worked it through. So welcome to episode 1 of the Turtledust tutorial. And here's our agenda. We're going to be creating and showing you how to create and import new files in Fresco. I'm going to take you through an interface tour. We're going to learn how to adjust, draw, and clip vector lines. We're going to be creating and organizing layers using the Lasso tool and masking tool, and we're going to play with the new fill reference layer with the paint bucket feature of Fresco to give color to our illustration. Our workshop tonight, we're going to be creating a Cartoon Network style illustration using Adobe Fresco. We're going to be working on the iPad. The tutorial is going to take about an hour and a half here on streaming. We probably going to get through illustrating one character, dropping in a gray background, working on a little bit of the background, doing some color fill, and then later you'll be able to watch the tutorial on the YouTube, our YouTube channel, which is Turtledust Tunes on YouTube, and you can watch it at your own pace. We'll cut out a lot of the extra things so that you can get through it quickly and get to the information you need. I've got some visuals going on the side just beneath my video. I've got a image there that you can follow along with. I'll be demoing via my iPad to the stage right or left. And if you have any questions, if you're in the chat, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We'll be taking breaks periodically to answer chat questions. I'll be teaching, so I won't be able to actively respond to chats as they come, but I will take time out during this workshop to answer some of the questions that come up during the session. All right, and then we'll finally end it off with a Q&A. If you have any questions, You can ask them at the end of the session, as well as email us later. You can find our email on the website. So we're going to start with talking about Fresco and its new documentation creation. So you can create documents from the templates that are available. We have some standard sizes here. We have the custom screen size, which is the size of the device that you're using. Size that I like to commonly use, which the system picks up on eventually. You've got 4K, which is a very good size if you're trying to make something that's going to be shown on large screens, and then Full HD, which is our standard 1920 by 1080. All those sizes are made to fit the standard devices and port to the standard social media networks, though you might want to make sure that you know what your target is before you create your file. For this tutorial, we're going to be bringing in a sketch, and that sketch is available for download on our Turtledust Media tutorials page. The link should be in the description if you want to go and download that PSD. It is portable into Adobe, and I'll show you how to Fresco. I'll show you how to pull that in. So those are your different file type creation features. Beneath there, we have our recently created files, so you can see I stay pretty busy. The great part about Adobe Fresco is that it keeps all of your files in the cloud. So once you import a file into Adobe Fresco, it's stored in your cloud drive, so that if you open up Cloud from Photoshop, if you go to the Adobe app and you open up your cloud files, everything that you've created in Adobe Fresco will be stored there. Fresco does not work locally. One of the good things, because saving is a lot easier. You can access your files from anywhere. Chances of losing. One of the downsides that I've encountered is that sometimes there are conflicts between various devices using Fresco simultaneously. Fresco is really optimized for the iPad, though it can be used on PC and desktop machines. So to get started, we're going to be importing the PSD file that I have available on the website. And down here in the corner, you can see we have a Create New button, which does essentially pretty much what happens up here at the top of our application, but we can also go down here and click Import and Open. So Import and Open is going to give us the option to open either PSD files or Sketch or Draw projects. I'm going to open up a PSD. I've already downloaded it to my iPad, and so there's the PSD. Click there, and it's going to open it up in Adobe Fresco. We're going to start this tutorial off by getting you oriented with the system. You first need to know where things are and be familiar with your tools before you really try to dive into making any art. I always compare it to someone who's learning to paint. What I found with painting was that I really wanted to start making masterpieces immediately, but until I was more adept at working with the brush and the paints, was I really able to paint anything. And just like with any other creative tool, you got to know the tool pretty well before you move into actually making work. So take your time, get familiar with the interface, otherwise you'll struggle with that piece before you can get into making art. Hopefully this step-by-step will allow you to make some steps without having to do some of that learning, but you know, it's always good to be fairly familiar. I'm also not going to cover every button and tool because there are specific buttons and tools that I'm going to use while working through this tutorial. So we're going to start, I'm going to quickly turn on the touch indicator so you can see where I'm touching on the iPad, which is a really cool feature for those of you who want to do Adobe Fresco tutorials. So now that I've turned that on, you can see where I'm touching on the screen, and so you can see where I'm working and how I'm interacting with the system. So we're going to start up at the top, and at the very top, right next to my button, this little arrow takes us out of Fresco. It takes us back to that start page where we can create new files, get to our recent files, and import new files. So whenever you're done, I've hit it all the time because it looks like a back button or an undo button. So I hit that all the time and end up there even though I don't want to leave. One of the good things about leaving is when you leave via that button, it's going to automatically save. But you don't have to leave to save. You can click on the title of the file, and just beneath the file is the Save Now button. So when you have changes that are unsaved within Adobe Fresco, you're going to have this little star next to the title, and that star is going to tell you that the file that you're working with is currently not saved saved. You can also rename your file by clicking on the name. It'll open up the type interface, and you can name the file however you like. Next to that is our zoom level. You can click and drag, and that will zoom you in and out. This was really useful when I was working on the desktop. Now that I'm working with the iPad, I just use pinch zoom to twist and zoom my palette. But if you're looking for a specific zoom level, you can click, and then you can enter in your zoom level, and it'll get you to where you want to go quickly, right? Of course, your standard undo and redo, those are standard. You know, if you are a digital user, you are going to be using that a lot, undo and redo. You can also, when you make a mark on your canvas, you can use undo just by double tapping with 2 fingers, or tapping with 2 fingers will do undo. I think 3 fingers is redo. 2 fingers to undo, 3 fingers to redo on the iPad. So I've got a couple things to undo. All right. We're going to skip over that little head there, and we're going to jump to the share button. The share button's awesome because it gives you all of the ways that you can get your files out of Adobe Fresco. We're going to talk quickly about the ones beneath, and then we'll jump into the publish and export, which gives you more options. So we have the ability to do a quick export, which is going to allow you to drop a PNG version of your image out of the system. Then you can also export things to Illustrator because you can work in vectors. You can create your base vector drawing in Fresco, then move it over to Illustrator when you're ready to refine or even redraw with more precise tools. You can share a link, which allows you to then share your whole file with people outside of your within your work group if you're working collaboratively with others. You can also live stream directly from Fresco, though the camera that is on the device is usually not showing. It shows your head and then the screen. It's not optimal for streaming, though if you wanted to stream on the fly or just demo your screen, you could do it that way as well. The way I'm getting my iPad into the screen right now, I'm sharing it into Discord, and then Discord is sharing it on my desktop, and then I'm putting it through OBS, if you're curious about that. So now we're going to jump to publish and export. And in publish and export, we get more ways to share our files. A couple repeated ones, such as quick export, is also in the publish and export. Then we have export as, which lets us export in more than just one file format. Here, if you want to get into PSD, you can export through export as. I believe your options are PNG, JPEG, PSD, and PDF. PDF, they're good for getting things between Adobe Illustrator and other vector programs. And another one that I want to talk about the most was the time-lapse, which allows you to export time-lapse videos of your creation. So if you wanted to review, share the process, let people see, they're really handy for making promos for tutorials like this. I think in my promo for this, I had a time-lapse video of the creation of this piece playing underneath my video. So there are tons of ways to get your materials out of Fresco in a format that you need for the project that you're working on. All right. So we also want to talk about, not only we've got undo, redo, sharing, now we've also got the settings area. I went into the settings area earlier to turn on the touch input so you can see where I'm touching. But if you touch the little gear in the top, what you're going to get is your settings panel. At the bottom, you have your app settings, and I'll jump into that for a second. But if you wanted to flip your entire drawing, you could do that. Go back. You could rotate the entire drawing. You can turn on and off the touch shortcut, as well as artboard preview. But I'm going to jump into app settings because there's a few things that I want to talk about here. Before we go into the next piece of the interface tour, my interface is not set up in a standard way. My interface is flipped for my comfort. When you open up Adobe Fresco by default, you're going to see the brush tools on the left and the drawing tools on the right. I'm sorry, the brush tools on the left and the layer tools on the right. I like to flip it because I draw right-handed, and that gives me quick access to those brush tools. And then I can use my other hand to access things like layer settings and the shortcut keys and that sort of thing. So I flipped it. To adjust your settings, you're going to come in and you can go into the interface area here, where you can then select whether or not your interface is right-oriented or left-oriented. There's another setting that I also wanted to talk about here, and that is input line snap. So when you go to input, here you can use the line snap tool. I'll show you a little bit about how the line snap tool works. I am going to reference it when we talk more about using the rulers or the drawing aids. You do have drawing aids, but the snap tool simplifies and speeds up the process if you use it correctly. It's not turned on by default, so if you wanted to use the snap line tool, you'll have to go into app settings and change it. There's a lot of good features you can adjust here in the settings, but I'm not going to go through them all. For this tutorial, we just want to make sure that we have our input set for snap tools, and that we have our interface adjusted in the way that works best. And that's my Roomba letting me know that it needs to be charged. Let me go back to general. All right. So you can go ahead and close that window, and give me 1 second. Where were we? Okay. All right, so before we move into the next session, I'm going to stop and look to see if there's any chats. We're going to take about 5 minutes to go through and sort of gather where we're at, see if there's anybody who has questions. It looks like there was a question, but or chat, but there wasn't anything to report. So we're going to move on. All right. So continuing with the interface, we're going to talk about the toolbar. So over on my left side, we start with our layers tool. And when we click on that, we can hide and show our layers. Right now, I have now I have 7 layers currently in this file that I created while making the rough sketch. And those layers are built up based on the way I work. I work really rough and really sketchy in the beginning, just kind of getting things to work. So sometimes I create layers as I need them, fill layers to block out certain things because I want to draw underneath it. I always draw extra because I never know where I'm going to adjust things. Drawing on a single layer has its advantages, but drawing on multiple layers means that you're going to have maximum flexibility. If you've done any professional work, what you're going to find is that things that you never anticipated you were going to need to do in a file crop up. And if you spent your entire time putting everything on one layer and then they ask you to shift a character like a 1/4 inch to the left, then you have to cut and move and readjust and repaint. So if things are on layers, potentially things that you anticipate could be moved, like characters in a scene, items and objects in a scene, if those are all on separate layers, they can be moved and adjusted. It's a little bit more logistics. There's a little bit more in the way of logistics to navigate that, but if you have a file that's built well and organized well, which is what we're going to talk about today, file organization and layer naming, you should be able to easily make those changes quickly, rapidly, and keep your clients happy. So you can get to the layer properties by clicking on a layer. By clicking on this sliders here. And layer property is pretty simple. It's the name of the layer. This layer is currently unnamed. We're going to name it quickly as rough sketch. We have our blend mode. It's on normal. We have all the typical blend modes that you are probably familiar with from Photoshop if you're a Photoshop user. I'm not going to go into those blend modes. I do use some during this tutorial, and I'll talk about them at that time. Then we have our layer opacity. You can just slide that left and right to change the opacity of your layer. So as we drop that down, you can see that the rough line art gets less and less opaque, sliding that back and forth, right? Then we're going to go to our new layer button, and if we click and hold that, we get our layer options, or if we just tap it quickly, it creates a new layer. Right, so we're going to undo that. Beneath that is our hide show layer. So if we click on the little eye, it puts a slash through it. It also puts an eye icon on that particular layer with a slash through it to show us that that layer is now hidden. When a layer is hidden, you can't affect it. It'll say you cannot draw on this hidden layer, and it reminds you that you might need to unhide it in order to manipulate it. And then we're going to jump. All right, so that's layer properties. Another big piece is layer actions. So if you click and hold on a particular layer, you'll get your layer actions. Right? You can also click on this 3 button to get your layer actions, and these layer actions will affect the current layer. I'm going to be referring to the layer actions because there are some tools that we're going to be using throughout this tutorial that are going to be in the layer actions area. That's the reason why I'm taking the time to do this interface tour. As we're drawing, I'm not going to be able to refer to exactly where some of the items are. I'm hoping that you'll remember that the toolbar has things that include layer and layer manipulation as well as some effects. And then we're going to move over to our brush bar once we're done here, and I'll take you through some of those tools that we'll use in this tutorial. Remember, we're creating a simple animation style illustration with line art, backfills, color, and some effects if we get to them. Last on this side is the drawing aids, and I mentioned the drawing aids when we were talking about the snap line. So we have the ruler, which allows us to then have a straight edge that we can manipulate into location and then draw straight edge lines. We also have a circle tool, which I used for this particular illustration quite a bit, and that can be moved around as well, manipulated and stretched. It's cool because when the shape turns blue, we know that we're at a perfect circle. If it's not blue, then we're not at a perfect circle, right? We've also got a square tool, which when we hit the blue, we know that we have a square shape. Grabbing the edges keeps it correct proportioned. Grabbing one of the edges lets us manipulate the proportions. We can move it around just by grabbing in the middle and moving it around. And we also have our rotate tool that allows us to rotate that around. And it's the same for the polygon tool as well, where we can add additional sides to get different polygonal shapes. Those are all handy. I used them. If you look at the final illustration, you'll see that I used almost all of the shape guides. The one that I used the most, circle, to maintain this circular area of the cockpit, and so it was a little challenging, but it worked out. I usually build my backgrounds using Blender 3D, and then I don't have to do all the sort of measuring and things are perspectively correct when I use 3D. But for this particular illustration, I felt really compelled to stay within Fresco to do the full illustration. All right, so that is our toolbar down to our drawing aids, and we're going to flip over to the other side of the screen where we're going to find our brush tools, right? And starting at the top, we're going to have our pixel brush. As you can see here on the screen, all of our brushes have a similar sort of layout. When you click and hold anything that has the little arrow next to it, you're going to get some additional features. There are quite a few vector brushes. You can choose the ones you want and the style you want. We are not going to be using any pixel brushes for this tutorial. We're mostly going to be focusing on illustrating with the vector brush because we've already got our rough layer. I used the sketching brush to do my undersketch. I like using the sketching pencil at about 8 or 9. I also let it use tapering, so pressure response works using that brush. So right now it's at a pretty high brush size, but I'll talk about adjusting brush size here in a second. Underneath that is our watercolor brush. We're going to skip over that to our vector brush. Vector brush, very similar. We have our different vector tools. They aren't as many vector brushes as there are pixel brushes, but the pixel brushes come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. The vector brushes are pretty standard, but you can find those here, and you can pick and choose, and you can make adjustments to them as well. And then we also have our eraser, and the eraser works on both the pixel brushes and the vector brushes, except when you're erasing vector lines with the eraser, you don't get any texture in your erasing as you would with some of the pixel brushes. All right. Hence it's called the pixel eraser. All right, then we have our transform tool. So when we click on our transform tool, we get our transform handles, and similarly to the drawing aids, you've got your control handles, so you can scale and rotate and manipulate. All right, you can undo all of that by 2 fingers. We've also got our nudge tool, and this is handy because sometimes you're not as precise when you're moving things around with your finger. So if you just wanted to nudge things, you can click one of the nudge inputs, and it's going to move it over at a fairly small increment. All right, undo that. A lot of little movements. So we're undoing all of that. We can also move this manipulator around just by grabbing in the center, so we can put it where we want it more comfortably. So if you want to put it in a place where you can manipulate it with your other finger, so that you can have one finger or your drawing utensil in your primary hand and your nudge near your secondary hand, it's all adjustable. All right. When you're done, you also at the top of the screen have your vertical and horizontal flips, and when you're done, you click done, and it'll let you finalize your movement. And I'm just going to hit cancel or continue. All right. Don't worry, we're eventually going to get to some drawing, but I definitely wanted to make sure that everybody was familiar with how to use Fresco and where to find things before we jump into the piece where we're actually working. Next is our marquee tool. So just underneath the transform is our marquee tool. If you click and hold that, you have your freeform / polygonal lasso. This is my favorite tool. I use it quite extensively to make shape selections. You also have your brush selector, which I don't use quite often, and then your square and your elliptical selector. You can select those just by clicking on them. We're going to stick on the polygonal / freeform selector. I like it because you can draw your selection any shape you want, and unlike Photoshop, I'm going to deselect that, you can go freeform to point, so that you can make freeform and point-to-point selections. It's very nice. You also have the ability to, unlike in Photoshop, by default, if you make a selection in Fresco and you make another selection, the two selections stay. Versus whereas in Photoshop, when you make a new selection, the system assumes you want to release the last selection. I like this because many times you can make smaller selections as you build up to the bigger one versus having to try and hold your pen until you get all the way around the complex shape. All right. Underneath there is your paint bucket, and with the paint bucket I also want to talk about with the paint bucket we're going to also talk about our eyedropper, where we can sample color. So paint bucket lets you fill color, eyedropper lets you sample color, and underneath that is your color panel. So clicking on that shape there, at the bottom you get your color wheel, and you can select your colors by dragging anywhere around the ring and then adjust your hue and saturation in the center square. You also have your color opacity. You've got your, what's really handy is that you have a default white and a default black that are preset, and you can just click on those, get quickly to those two values so that you keep consistent white and consistent black. You've got sliders if you want to work in your hue, saturation, and brightness, and you've got all of your most recently used colors will automatically start to fill up a palette underneath. You've got a number of predefined palettes that you can dig through if you'd like to. It also pulls in your palettes from your Adobe profile. So if you're saving palettes into your cloud-based color library, it will pull it into Fresco and make those available to you as well. Right? I like to stick with recent because as I get working, I like to get back to the colors that I've chosen fairly quickly. I'm really bad when it comes to color in that, like, I kind of make it up on the fly, and so I like to just be able to get back to what I had before without having to try and figure it out. All right. Last but not least, I also wanted to talk about the magic button. So this button is our magic button, and it does a number of different things on a number of different tools. So I created this grid table to sort of explain how it works. So you can, by default, the shortcut button is deactivated. If you double click it, it's action 1, and if you click it again, it's action 2. As you can see, the action 1 and action 2 have different effects on the different types of tools. So if I am drawing with my pixel brush, if I activate action 1, that same brush now becomes an eraser. If I click it again, it draws again. This allows me to then move back and forth between erasing and drawing really quickly. So I'll remove that. If I'm using it with my vector lines, select the vector brush. I can make my vector shape. It draws when inactive. When I double click, it erases. Can't see that. It's making breaks in that line. If I click again, then we have our line clipping, which is extremely handy. So I can start to knock out line edges that I didn't need. That's for some reason is. It's usually a little bit more precise, but you see the blue line tells me what things I'm going to be taking out, right? So I can start cutting away pieces based on those edges, right? And with the marquee tool, if I select one of my shapes and I want to get a precise square, if I double click on my marquee tool, now I have a constrained square or a constrained double click, a constrained circle, right? So if you click again, you get selection again. You can move quickly between constrained and non-constrained marquees. All right, so this is a easy chart to quickly reference those different things if you're working with this shortcut key. I like to keep it in a position so that I can quickly tap on it with my other finger as I'm drawing with my primary hand. All right, so I'm going to take another quick break, drink some water, answer some questions. Open up the water. So once again, I'd love to see what you make after following this tutorial. I'd love to see what the results are of what you produce. If you want to post and tag us, it's at Turtledust Tunes on Instagram, it's at Turtledust Media on Facebook, and at Turtledust on Twitter. It's also at Turtledust Tunes on TikTok if you want to make a TikTok video of what you create. I really encourage you to go out and check Adobe Fresco out. It's a free application. It works really well. I think it rivals Procreate, although I might be a little biased. I use both. It's a great tool, and I hope to see more people using it, and I'm excited to see what all of you create using the tool. All right, so last, we're going to now start jumping into doing some work, but I want to talk quickly about the difference between vector and pixel layers. So pixels, raster, bitmap layers differ from vector layers in that a vector layer is a mathematical equation for line versus a pixel, which is individual pixels of the screen being either turned on or off at a specific opacity, right? So the anti-aliasing, which is the fall off, where you can see it's pure color at the center, but as you get closer to the edges, in order to give it that smooth look, they kind of alias or halftone the pixels. So we're going to be creating, since we're going to be working in vectors, we're going to be working with vector layers, but we also will be using some pixel layers as well. All right, so what we're going to do, I've got the instructions for what I'm doing underneath, so if you get lost or I lose you while I'm going through this, you can always refer back to these instructions to kind of see where we're at. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create 2 new layers. Just above our top layer that we called Rough Sketch, we're going to click, and on the iPad, when you just click to create a new layer, it doesn't know what it is until you touch your brush to it. We are creating what I like to call a knockback layer. This is just a white fill layer that I set at a lower opacity in an effort to sort of knock back the underlying image, so I can see where my new line is appearing versus my my old sketch. So I like to create the new layer. I'm going to go down to fill, and I'm going to select white. I'm going to select my paint bucket, and I'm going to fill in. I'm going to fill in that entire layer. I'm going to fill in that entire layer. Clear. All right. So I've got a completely blank white layer. I'm going to jump over to my layer properties. I'm going to drop that down to about 60%. So now I've got my drawing, but now it's lighter, and I can see where my new lines will appear better now when I draw over it. Above that, we're going to create a vector layer. So new layer again. We're going to select our vector brush. We're going to come down to our brush settings. This is the brush settings. This is your paint bucket settings. It's a little panel down here that you can click and drag off. I like to have this floating so that I can quickly get to it. It's got our color picker on it. It's got our line weight or line size and our smoothing level. So we're going to go with a 5 pixel line with a smoothing of about 70, and we're going to set our line color to black. We can click the black square, or we can drag to one of these corners, and then we're going to click on the very bottom of that to get to our brush settings. So because we're trying to achieve a Cartoon Network animation feel, I don't think we want too much taper. What you're going to find is when you're animating and you have to move a character around, if you have things like tapering line shapes or things that thick to thin, then if you don't have an extremely skilled team that is very aware of the style, or you haven't taken the time to sit down and figure out how thick to thin is used throughout your illustration, what you're going to find is that your team is going to struggle to match that. So by removing line dynamics or line shape or thick to thin, we're going to get a much easier to follow cleanup, much easier to follow animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the beginning and end taper, and we're going to set those both to 0%, and we're going to remove all of our pressure dynamics, all of our dynamics here. It's kind of unintuitive considering you've got this device that senses your pressure and reacts to your hand similarly to a pencil, but in an effort to keep things simple, keep things consistent, removing those dynamics and removing the shape dynamics allows us to simplify that. So now when we make a line, we're going to get consistent thickness throughout, and it's going to give us a nice solid feel. All right. Before I start drawing, because I need to be able to see where I'm putting my line down. As you can see, the blue line, the blue obscures that, so I'm going to turn that off. So I'm going to go app settings, into my inputs, and down to my show touches, and I'm going to turn that off as we begin to draw. So I'm going to take about 15 minutes, and I'm going to, or longer, and I'm going to try and draw through this main character, this central character, to try and get get set up for moving into our next piece, which is using some of the other features of Fresco. So you can see I'm making some lines here, and they're kind of rough and lumpy. I got some tips for you here. You're going to want to draw with your arm, your entire arm, making strokes that use your arm and not your wrist, right? There's a tendency to want to draw with your wrist, but you should be drawing with your arm, even if you're drawing down on the canvas. You're also going to want to pull versus push when you're drawing. Pull your strokes versus pushing your strokes, because pulling your strokes is a little bit easier than pushing them if you're drawing, right? Especially if you're drawing on something that's got an incline to it. You know, gravity is going to be your friend. You're also going to want to draw through your lines and draw with confidence. Not drawing with confidence leads to janky, wobbly lines, whereas drawing with confidence gets you something smoother. But you also want to draw with confidence and accuracy, and know your ability, right? So get to the correct zoom level, and then make your lines, right? And it's okay to go through or past where you are, because we are working with vector and we kind of want some of that overlap. Let's try that one more time. Right? It's going to take a couple, but see, we've got that overlap, and that gives us a nice, clean, somewhat clean. The faster you can make these marks, the straighter and smoother they're going to be. And you got to just sort of stroke with confidence. But you notice we're getting all of these, all this excess lineage, like that we don't need. But that's okay, because we have the clipping tool. So as we work and as we find the best way for our hand to naturally make the stroke we need, if it starts to get too much, we can start knocking those lines out by activating our shortcut. That gives us erase, right? But we can click it again, and now we've got clip. And we can just start knocking off those edges we don't need. Even little edges like this can be knocked back quickly and rapidly as we work, right? And we start getting something that looks pretty clean with just that. Double click to get out of it, and we can go back to making our strokes again. Working quickly, accurately, and confidently. And stroking through, right? So I can try and reach that, or I could just come like this, right? Oop, don't like that. Undo. Nope, too big. Calm it down. Exhale as you stroke. Right? Think about what you're trying to achieve. Visualize it in your head. And make your stroke. Try it one more time. Right? Until you get it. Double click. Get your thing. Oop, knock it back. I want to knock off some of that, but as you can see, it thinks that I want to take that whole line out, but I don't. So I can go to my erase, drop that through there, and knock out that bit. Right? Zoom in a whole lot there. Make the bottom half of that, the top half. Knock those out. Oop. Once again, erase. That's the great thing about working on iPad. You can get in there, you can zoom in pretty far. Start to knock those items. Start our line for this earpiece all the way in here. And I'm breaking my own rules by not pulling. I was a lot more careful in my line construction when I was doing the sort of practice run for this. I'm being a little bit more rapid for this tutorial. This was this is the hardest line to do, the top of this dome here. We're going to start as far away as we can. Maybe we can get it all in one stroke. Nope. It's hard to turn those corners and keep that consistent rounded shape here. Alright. Maybe we can pull it the other way better. So you can kind of see where you're going. You can be super particular about these things, but you can also just wing it, right? There's a lot of care put into the line work from the pieces that we're emulating from those shows of Craig of the Creek. We want to pay attention to things like tangents, right? So I can't go with my original line because it comes in too close to where my earpiece is. I can either push my earpiece in or I can just where my head shape is going to be. So let's double click that. That's another thing as far as erasing. The clipping tool is very good for then helping you to make big erasures quickly, right? The reason we need to pay more attention with these earpieces is because it's now going to affect the size and the shape of our head dome. So I'm going to go in here. We're going to be a little bit more careful about this shape here. All right, so now we're going to let's stay inside this line. A little more rounded, kind of low. That'll work. All right, double click, clip off those edges, knock out any little strays. You can even get in here really deep, take out that. Looks like we got something here too. Boom. Right. Start to get some really good precision in there. Get our neckline. We can use that to cross that up. Right? You can't see my hand, but I'm doing exactly what I said. I'm pulling, I'm drawing with my whole arm and not just my wrist. I can come back here and I can knock out those lines and get something that works reasonably well. You know, it's still a little pointy, but you know, for this tutorial I really just want to show you the techniques. We're not going to nitpick this particular thing for the tutorial, but essentially I worked that head dome until I got something that felt very rounded and with no sort of pointy tips. That's one of the things with trying to create multiple rounded shapes using this, you can go to your shape tools and you can use those as well. Right, so we could have come in here, we could have sized this up, get it to the right size, drop that there, stretch it out a little bit, and then used our guide. So why don't we do that? Let's turn that off for now. We're going to come here, just one, we're going to use it, the erase, cut, go here, take out that whole top, turn that off, turn our circle back on, get it lined up just so, because it's going to draw it about the center of that, and we're just going to drop our pencil and use it to follow that around. And we followed through a little too much, but once again, we've got our handy dandy knock some stuff out. So, we can do the same with his neckline. Drop that down there, maybe spread it out a little bit more because it's not as deep a shape there. Drop in that. I'm just going to use it to follow all of these shapes here. And because I'm not following my own advice, we want to draw through. Draw through, right? We can even use this to get this piece here, hit our little, if we lose our control points for our circular tool, we can turn that on and off there. So turn them on, shrink that down, use it to get these two necklines here. We're going to do it on two separate circles because it's supposed to be kind of the wrinkle of his suit collar. So I'm going to drop one there, and I'm going to move it slightly, or even just shrink my circle a bit and adjust it. Even distort it a tiny bit, and then we've got that line there. Right, and I was also telling you that we have a ruler tool which we can pull out by clicking and holding, go into ruler, and I can now line that up to get some of these straighter lines on his suit here. I find that it's a little difficult because this thing likes to snap to specific degrees to just use snap line. So instead of using the ruler, I'm going to click, I'm going to draw, I'm going to start drawing from my start point as best I can, but then I'm going to hold. Did you see how that snapped to a straight line? All right, undo, I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to pull that line, hold it, and it's going to snap. And I can adjust it and drag it where I need it, get that line I need, do it again, hold, snap. Draw again, hold, snap. See, in the drawing, these aren't precise lines. So I tended not to actually use the snap line for lines like this, only for areas where I knew it was exactly straight, so it was mostly in the background that I used snap line. But for this, I was actually just making my strokes to give it a slight bit of irregularity, because he's not a robot, he's not a rigid item, so there's going to be some irregularity and a little bit of curvature to even the places that seem like they're straight. So we start to drop in some of these other elements. Oh, once again, take my own advice and draw through. Draw through. Clean this up a little bit. So there. You can see how this is a very quick way to get a nice clean drawing using the various tools. So I can then go through, I can knock out all of that, yeah, knock out all of those two lines there, drop, do these by hand. Use snap where necessary. Oop. There's a little bit of a bulge there. See how we can quickly get results once we get pretty good at using these tools. Because as we get more confident, our lines hit more where we want them, and we don't have to go back and do as much correction. Alright, so I want to talk a little bit about that line I just put down. So this line hits right at this intersection, which this is not a good thing. So when you find lines hitting at intersections like that, you want to make a slight adjustment. Your brain might not see any issue with it, but in the background there's something off about it when you hit these tangent lines. So you want to go, and I'm going to now stroke just slightly below that, and once again clip as needed. I'm going to make these freehand. Get better results, because I want, like I said, I want a little bit of organicness, because he is not a robot. These are not precision lines, not computer generated. He's wearing a semi-rigid spacesuit, and we want to sort of imply that with the line quality. I know that when I was doing this final piece, I did do some redrawing because I didn't like some of the underlying drawing, or I didn't fully work out what I was trying to capture, so I had to go back and reevaluate some of the structure. So what you're going to find if you work on this, if you're using my PSD, is that some of the things that I ended up putting in the final aren't there in the original. Ooh. And when you go through to work on your piece. So another thing to keep in mind, we are going to be using paint bucket and reference fill, and those are dependent on having closed shapes. So think about those closed shapes as you're drawing. Not everything is going to be a closed shape. As you can see, I sometimes like to leave gaps in the line work. It gives it a certain amount of appeal, but it also makes it a little bit more difficult to then go back and do the fill work. But sometimes appeal trumps practicality, because we're trying to get something that people like to look at versus something that is functionally good. Yeah, I've raised the issue with the Fresco team regarding this getting in here and using these guides, because sometimes they don't do what's expected, or maybe I just get lost in the sauce. There's so many different things to keep up with when you're doing these illustrations. You sometimes get just lost in your stroke and you don't realize you have one setting activated while you're going. Back to Fresco. Undo. Not sure how long we've been drawing, but I want to try and finish out his body, and then we will go into the next phase. Still got no questions. That's cool. And I included the joystick as part of this illustration for this particular character, but I'm not going to do that for this tutorial. So I'm just going to leave these joysticks out, as I probably wouldn't attach them to them if I was making actual animation ready illustration, because his hand will probably leave those items at some point. right, we'll take a moment of silence as we draw through this. Looking pretty good. Maybe even better than the one that I created the first time. Definitely feels smoother, but you know, drawing things a second time with not as much pressure sometimes is easier. All right, just gonna finish up the legs really quickly here. Take a short break, and then we will get back at it. I think I'm gonna close this off. So let's create a circle, but not 100% round, right? Then I'm going to go back. Take that out. Take that out. How am I like that? Right, I got two little fabric bends here. Leg. I don't think I'm going to make it straight. I think I'm going to give a little bit of an arc. Too much. Not enough. There we go. Like that. Nope. Nope. Yep, maybe we can't do that one stroke. Sometimes we get lucky. Most of the time we don't. I'm going to close that off because we're going to be doing fills. Double click. Start knocking off edges. Not going to stress that too much. A lot of things that I would adjust, but that gives us a fairly complete ink layer. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Close up some of these gaps maybe. Oop, not take them out, just close them up. Nope, can't be that sloppy with it. Here we go a little bit further, like that. And that way we can take that out, take those out. And then we got something we can fill. All right. So that's a nice vector layer. We're going to click here, hit save now, just to be on the safe side. And then take a little stretch break. Where are we on time? We're about an hour and 18 minutes in. Alright. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to then put a gray layer behind it. The reason I put the gray layer behind is sometimes you get the illusion that, wow, this sketch is really dope, and then you turn off the rough sketch underneath it. You're like, oh, that's not that dope. You know what I mean? It's kind of plain Jane. So I don't know about you, but something about the sketch layer sitting underneath it gives it a little bit more character, gives it a little bit more depth. You can even see some lines that we forgot to do here on the feet. So drop those in. Close enough. Not close enough. I hate that. No. That's better. Not perfect, but better. All right. So, in order to prevent myself from getting too married to this layer that appears to be have all this grit and detail and, like, you know, slight shadow, slight shading around each of the line pieces, I like to give myself a little gray layer underneath that sort of blocks out any of that underlying sketch, so that I don't get married to it and then be very disappointed when I turn off that layer and what's underneath is not as appealing. So when I've got my sketch kind of worked out, I like to go take my marquee tool. We're going to use the freeform lasso, and we're going to get in here and we're going to use a combination of point to point where we can. Sometimes I just go full point to point, but not everything is, and then we can draw a little point to point. And because sometimes these things get wacky, I like to close it off as soon as possible, just so I don't lose what I've already done. That is Photoshop trauma, so you can ignore that a little bit, but those places where we can go pretty straight, I like to do that. But sometimes when you freeform lines, things aren't as straight as you would think. We did go straight here, so we can count and guarantee we can close that off so we don't lose it. At least now, if we accidentally hit the screen, we're not automatically losing. Oh, I double clicked, so let me redo that, losing some of our selection. So hand draw that. Point to point that. Hand draw. Oop. I'm feeling better about this. Right, we're just going to make our selection. Keep going there. And we're not going to do the dome because the dome of his helmet is supposed to be transparent. So we're not going to put a fill layer behind it because you should be able to see the detail on the seat behind through that helmet dome. So we're just concerned with getting the character filled. Right? Got that selected. Let's do this last arm, and I think we're ready. This arm should have a lot of straight edges. The pose is supposed to be like kind of pushing that arm. This one is slightly adjusting the thing, so that straight, super straight arm line here really hopefully emphasizes that sort of like push for thrust. Okay. That's looking pretty good. All right, so we've got our selection. Now we're going to want to go down to the bottom here. You can see our different transform, erase, mask, and deselect. We're going to create a new layer, and then we're going to hit that mask tool. All right, that masks out everything. The red stuff is the stuff that is transparent, and the things that are solid are the unhighlighted or non-red pieces. We slide that to get to your mask. You just take the layer that's masked and you slide to the left. To turn off the mask, you just slide to the right. The cool part about masking in Fresco is you can go into masking and you get a different set of tools. You can invert the mask, you can flatten the mask, you can copy the mask and paste it onto other layers. So this is really helpful for knocking out the background on things, getting a similar clipping. I've copied the mask from one layer to a bunch of other layers in order to prevent stray lines and stray things from other layers behind characters. So it's very handy. Ooh. Slide that away. And now we're going to fill. We're going to go to our paint bucket. We're going to select it. We're going to click on the black dot there to bring up our color palette. and we're going to move this thing on the edge up until we get a fairly dark gray. He's going to be in the foreground, so we're going to have him be darker than all the characters in the background. Turn that off and click, and we have a filled character. So now you can see how that helps to separate him from the background, to let us see exactly what our vector lines are doing on their own layer. But now, let's say I wanted to move this character around. I'm going to have to now select 2 layers in order to move Milo if I needed to. Otherwise, I'm just getting the line work. So I can do that by double-clicking to activate my shortcut. And now that my shortcut is active, action 1, with the layers, if I select another layer, it's now going to select multiple layers. And then I can hit transform, and now I'm going to move both those layers around. That's a lot of work to be able to move this single character around. So another way to approach it, turn off multi-layer select, is to group the layers. So grouping layers in Fresco is easy, because now we can just click, drag it on top of the other one, let it go, and we've got a layer group. So now if I hit transform, I'm getting both of them. Undo that. I can double click on that layer group, and it takes me into the individual layers. So then I can go in now and adjust my layer properties. So I want to make sure that this is named vector layer, and we're going to call this Milo line work. Let's just call it Milo line. And then we're going to call this one Milo fill. Done. And I think we could even name this whole group. This whole group is going to be called Milo. All right. So now when we take this into other programs, we're going to know exactly what layer we're dealing with Milo. Okay. So now that I have my line work, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm ready to move on to color. We could go through, and what I've done in the past is I created my background layer, right? And with the mask, I would go through, select just this piece, and because it's got a mask on it, if I wanted to make that hand blue, I could just go like this. Oop. Blue, make that the color I want, and then fill it, right? Now we've got a blue hand. But that could take a long time. And then I've got to worry about this new layer. We have a thing called layer reference fill, where we can fill using reference layers. So what we first want to do is make sure that all of our line holes are plugged. Oop. And potentially you can make your reference layer or do your reference fills and then go back if you want gaps in your drawing. Add those gaps. But you're going to want to, I can show you a shortcut to make sure that most of those holes are filled. Places that you know are going to have a similar color. So let's go down to our color picker, and I am going to go to my library and let's choose this palette for Milo. Right? So let's say choose this for hard parts. I'm now going to select this layer, click it, and down here underneath mask content, we're going to set as reference. See that? So click, set as reference. When we're done, we can release the reference, set as reference. Right? So now this is our reference layer. We're going to create a new layer and we're going to make it a vector. I usually do my fills in pixel, but with the reference layer, filling in vector is going to give you a lot more flexibility, infinite zoom, and so on and so forth. And now when I go to my fill tool, I can fill in these areas that share a common color with those colors. And it references the layer above it. So I could turn off that line layer and still have it. Alright. So you notice the helmet there filled in areas that I didn't want, right? So I'm going to then go back, undo. Right? And my solution is I take my lasso and just kind of block out the areas that I don't want it to fill. So it's okay if it fills, cancel. Okay if it fills there, I don't want it to fill there. It's okay. It's going to try and bleed into there. Don't want it to go there, there. And I'm pretty confident those things in the bigger area don't have any gaps. So now I can fill like that. That's not what I wanted either. I want to be a little bit more precise on my fill down here. So there. Right. Like this. Right. Double click, and now my marquee is a deselect, and I can cancel. I can deselect that stuff there. Now, do I get what I want? Bam. Right? Wrist guards, deselect. Wristbands. I'm gonna take this color for my armpits. Oop. Got some spillage there. So I can jump to my marquee. And the reference layer means that you don't have to be as precise with these marquee selects, whereas like before you would have had to precisely select those various things. Oop. Ooh, that felt too big, right? So we're going to And these aren't the colors that I had in the final. I'm kind of making these colors up. Let's see, nice dark color there. Looks a little bit like a anime. I actually like these colors. They're not too bad. This is a nice palette. Don't even remember where I got it from. I think Cooler. Let's get it way in there because we're gonna just fill his face and it'll blot out his eyes. So if that's our color, we're gonna take the brown here for his face and a slightly darker for the nose, and then we'll come back, hit the eyes with a white. Alright, booyah. Feeling pretty good about that. And, what else? Oh, his helmet. So I'm going to create that on another layer since he's got glass that's going to cover his face. His face is going to be slightly muted and the color slightly changed by the color of the glass. Oh, and it looks like we've got some people jumping in to say some things. Oh, thank you very much, Armaine and friends. Thank you for watching. I'm trying to show people how to use vectors. I'm drawing close to the end here. I wanted to show how to use reference layers. You'll be able to watch it again on my YouTube, but let's drop in this last color, and then I'll open things up for question and answer. If you have some questions about what I've been working on, some questions about using the Adobe Fresco, please feel free to drop those questions into the chat. Alright, so last thing is our helmet. So I'm going to, still using a reference layer, I'm going to create a new layer. It's going to mark off where I want to fill with the marquee. And because there, I can go kind of big. Boom. I'm going to select this color here. Go very light for my glass color. And then fill, vector, oop, vector, 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 vector. Boop. Right, reference layer. I'm even going to fill the lines with reference layer. And we're going to move it above our reference layer. And we're just going to fill in all these pieces. not the best way to do that. Nope. I'm going to actually clear that. So I can erase all that by hitting there. I'm going to release my reference layer actually. I'm going to deselect, and now I'm going to do a drawing. Armani. Yep. All right. So I was just looking at the chat. I had some people come in, say hello. I'm sorry I missed you. I have been on here for a little while. I usually stop for little breaks to address folks in the chat. So if I didn't address you and you said hello, welcome, thank you for stopping by. And I will be done with this in just a second, and we can have a little back and forth on what I've been doing and what we've been covering this evening. You can ask questions. I can show you more. And if you want to see more, you can go to YouTube and watch as we to review the whole video. And so I'm going to fill that whole thing. So now that's going to act as my glass layer. So I'm going to come to layer properties. I'm going to drop that down by a few. Ooh, makes it kind of look like he's in some sort of glass dome. And then I'm going to move that underneath my line layer. Right? The way I cheated this last time was that I created a second glass dome. How did I do it? I duplicated the dome. I then moved it above my line layer. Ooh. Alright. Click and drag. Click, hold. Okay, hit done. Click, hold, and drag to move that above. Once again, this is at, let's make that 55%. So change this to 55%. Right. Then I am going to use this as a reference layer. I'm going to come create another line layer. Another layer. And I'm going to fill black. And this time I'm going to make a selection around just the helmet glass line. Alright, ignoring all of these other lines. Yep. Right. Make sure we got all of it there. Oop. Oh, hello again. Armani, I'm glad you're still here. And like I said, I will answer questions here in just a minute. All right. And then I'm going to fill that. Oop. And that one. And maybe that one. Maybe that one. And that one there. Right. So then that way I've got the exterior line, but I don't have all the internal lines. It's one way to do it. It worked really well in the final piece, but that's about it. That's how I achieved the look of the final illustration. This is my example for tonight. It's a different color scheme. I like this color scheme, but my final drawing ended up looking like this, where you can see I have lots of layers. There was a reference layer I used for my colors. Right, this is my original character lineup that I used, And so I referenced these colors to create the character colors that are on them now. I went in, I had a layer that is just Milo, and that's because he sits on top of a then background layer, and then there's an entire layer of just the family. I can turn them on and off, and an entire layer of their chairs, because their chairs sit on top of parts of the background. So the way I layered it allows us to manipulate things. So if the director or someone said, oh man, dad needs to be moved slightly in or up or scaled down, I can come into the family layer, I can go to my dad layers. I'd probably group it based on what we talked about tonight, but I could also double click. I can select all my dad layers. I think there, and then when I hit move, I can move him around. But you see, I got some other layers. That's why it's important to group things, name things, and keep things really organized. So that's about it. I will, like I said, I will cut this all up, shrink it down. We ended up going about 2 hours tonight instead of the hour and 30 minutes that I talked about. But I should be able to narrow it down to about 30 minutes of video, cut out the part where my Roomba started complaining, and hopefully you all can enjoy this information. So I wanted to thank everybody for stopping in. Armani, thank you. I'm glad you like that perspective. It is, I like it. I really pulled inspiration from Macross Plus. It's an anime that sort of drove my younger life. And Macross Plus is a big inspiration for the work that I do. That isn't even the final. This one was the final. I went through and I made sure all the pieces, I added a little bit of lighting. Like I said, I fixed up all their masks, added a little bit of enhancement on their lines to darken them, and did the different effects in the background. Thank you. I pulled, so as you can see, I didn't get a chance to demo this. The characters have a very solid, smooth line work on them, whereas the background is a little bit rougher. This helps to sort of separate those background characters from the characters from the background. I was going to do the entire illustration with the sort of solid, smooth line. But then I was watching the show Hilda on Netflix, and I noticed that the background had this roughness to it, whereas the characters were sort of smooth lined. The backgrounds also were pretty muted, so that the characters sort of popped out from the background as well. They also did not use shadow in the show, because when you're animating characters with shadow, it's just another thing that you have to animate. So you want to try and keep, when you're animating characters, as many animating and pieces that need to be animated to a minimum. Yes, this illustration is 100% vector. I did an initial underdrawing, which I'm not even sure if it's still in this file here. I might have dumped it. Nope, here we go. We've got the underdrawing here. But by the time I got to the final, it's completely obscured. But everything that you see now is vectors, except for the cockpit dome grid. The dome grid was created in Blender. I created a sphere using not the typical sphere, but it's like the triangular sphere. I don't remember what it's called. Then I rendered it with just line work, and then I inversed it, put a multiply, and stuck it in the background. The way I imagine their ship, at least this particular ship, is that their cockpit is in a dome, and the dome gives them the impression that they're sitting outside, similar to a jet cockpit. But if you were to see it from the outside, there would actually be spaceship there, and this is just the cameras or however you would make that work. But it gives them full 360 view of their environment, but keeps them encased and safe without it being something weird like Durasteel or transparent Durasteel, like they say in a lot of things. I don't think ships in space will have actual windows. I don't know that we'll ever get to that point where there'll be actual windows. So I imagine that data and information collected from cameras and various sensors will give us the impression of what you see outside of the ship. Also considering that in actual space, you don't see anything. So all the images that we see, and I'm sorry I'm nerding out about space, but that inspires a lot of what I do. The pictures that we see of space are actually enhanced, like X-ray, ultraviolet spectrum. And so if you look with your naked eye, you'd see blackness. But with the instruments that they use to view into space, we get these beautiful, beautiful X-ray and ultraviolet images. So their cockpit dome sort of translates that into making it look like space has something going on. Anyway, too much explanation, but yeah, that's what I've been working on. I'm excited to see that people dropped in so late at night. Maybe you're on the other side of the world, but I do have to work in the morning. So if there aren't any specific questions, I'll stay here for another 5 minutes to answer any questions, say hello, chit chat back and forth, talk a little bit more about space, and invite you to like and follow my Twitch channel or my TikTok channel or Twitter. There's a lot of things going on in regards to things happening for me this year. Next Monday, I'm meeting with Issa Rae from Insecure. I don't know if you've seen that show, but I won a contest, and with that contest, I got some funding and some money. So I'm really hoping that I can use that money to hire other artists. Those artists, I'm looking for fairly experienced artists who are looking for an opportunity to up their skills, venture into animation. I will do some training. Essentially, that's what these videos are all about. I'm going to do tutorials on how I work so that you can learn from those tutorials. You can show me the work that you did based on those tutorials, and then I can say, this person is worth my time and money. Invite you in to the Discord or wherever we decide to work, and then work with you to teach you to help me and pay people for that opportunity. So if you're interested in animation, I'm trying to really emphasize on diversity. So I want to definitely give preference to people who are people of color, because black animation does matter, and I want to see more black animation out there. But I am definitely willing to work with anybody who appreciates animation and is really interested. So please feel free to connect with me, reach out, say hello. Yes, Turtledust. Yeah, that's my newest logo. The logo for me is inspired by the phrase "It's turtles all the way down." I know there's a book by John Green called Turtles All the Way Down. I haven't read it myself, but the concept "Turtles All the Way Down" is in reference to the nature of the universe. The universe sits on the back of a mother turtle, and that mother turtle sits on the back of a turtle, and it's just turtles all the way down. This is a deeper story I could tell. I mean, not really deeper, but and I'm not even sure if it's an actual story. But anyway, it's turtles all the way down. The universe is infinite. It's the same up as it is down, and it's all turtles. So I'm glad you like my turtles. And Knocked Shell, thank you for stopping in and saying hello. Thank you everybody for stopping in and saying hello. My father-in-law dropped in to say hello, and actually getting some views and some traffic, which is good. Once again, I'm going to be here every Wednesday night, taking you through the things I've learned the night before or the week before. Try to put as much preparation and time in it as I can, so that you can get the most out of it. This was the first one. It went better than expected. It's amazing how nervous you can get, even when you're sitting in your own house, talking to no one, like I was at the beginning. I don't know. It's just intimidating, but now I'm back in my element. So, once again, my name's Nick Butler. This has been the Turtledust tutorial number 1, and I think it's been a good success. Knockshell says, I know about the elephants carrying the earth, and under that is a big turtle carrying everything. Yeah, that I've heard that interpretation as well. I think there's an author. What is his name? Terry Pratchett. That's Terry Pratchett's world, where the elephants are holding up the flat earth that's sitting on the back of a turtle. And I think that also comes from history, or from folklore. So, oh, you're so welcome, and I look forward to doing more. But until then, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and good night.